Hey everyone. So I've covered the term inflation in probably at least two or three of my past videos. But this article out of CBC News under the business section led me to the point where I thought, you know what, let's cover it one more time. Because it's one of those things that I think it's so important for everyone to understand. Some people think that inflation is a good thing because that's how the political propagandists or the central planning hacks, they try to put forward and present that inflation is great. But what they always leave out, what you'll never hear, and you probably know this because if you pay attention to the media, you know it's like they never tell you this. But the only way inflation could ever be construed as being beneficial to the consumer, to the average person, to a business owner, to a corporation or to governments, yeah, I can make that argument on a few different levels. But for the overwhelming majority of the population, which are just consumers for the most part, or employees, right? I mean, we're not all employers, we're not all governments, we're not all CEOs of corporations. Matter of fact, the overwhelming majority to a large degree are just consumers for the most part. Employees and consumers. And if you're an employee or a consumer, inflation is terrible for you because it means a reduced amount of purchasing power on your paycheck. It means that your $400 a week paycheck, now you're still getting the same $400, but what you can purchase is reduced because the price increases means that, let's say last week you could buy, 20 items for $400. Well, now you're only going to be able to buy, let's say 19 items for that same $400. Although, like I say, it determines on, it's just math, but however many price or however many products and whatever price point you bought them. So whether it was 20 or 200, but it still comes down to the fact that at the end of the week, when you get your paycheck or 2 weeks or monthly, your purchase power when you go out to buy it, that means all the costs are that much more increased that you'll only be able to buy a lesser amount of what you could than the month prior. That's what inflation means. The only thing that's good, like if you hear about inflation heats up to 2.1%, which is what this article is saying, the only way that would ever be a benefit is if there was a sub portion of the headline where it said, but consumer wages, employee wages went up to the tune of 3.1%. Because then you would see it's like, oh, okay. So prices went up by 2.1%, but that's okay because my wages went up by 3.1%. So that means that I actually have more purchasing power and I can actually buy a little bit more to the tune of 1% more, right? But if you got no raise, or your wage was only reflective of whatever the minimum wage was, the price increases are always going to be at a much higher level than what you would see as a consequence of your wage increase. And what we're going to see today, or sorry, not today, come January 1st, is there's going to be an increase of wages in places like Ontario. The minimum wage in Ontario is going to go up to $14 an hour from $11.60. So it's going to be a huge increase in your purchasing power. So for a small time frame, you will benefit from it. But watch, and then you'll be able to come back to this video later and say, oh, fuck, Bennett was right too. Watch what happens as a consequence, as a result of you getting your wage increase, but under the pretense of having a central planning model with a central bank. You'll enjoy that benefit for a very short time frame, but then all of the corporations or the government will either tax or increase the prices that will be reflective and incongruent to the increase in your wages. So sooner rather than later, you'll find out it's like, oh shit, I didn't actually gain a raise because now all the prices are that much higher. So I'm back to being able to purchase the same what I could with my paycheck today as I could even back when it was $11.60. You'll have the same rough purchasing power. And this goes back to, if you pay attention, and I've shared this stuff in past videos, and this information is readily available and out there on the internet or anywhere that you search, is wages in Canada and the US, those are the predominantly the countries that I pay attention to mostly, have been stagnant for 40 years, 4 decades. So in other words, even when people were getting raises in the 70s or the 80s, and you thought, oh yay, prices always crept up that were a direct reflection because of central planning and central banks, where it's like you gained a little bit of a purchasing power initially, but then the prices were increased to reflect or match or exceed that. So you've seen time and time again that all this inflation, it's a net negative. It's a net negative if you're just an average consumer or an employee. The only inflation you should really concern yourself with is wage inflation that exceeds price inflation. Those numbers, but have you seen that in the last 10 years, a decade? You've never seen any point where wage inflation superseded or was higher than price inflation or monetary inflation. Like I say, you got to understand that inflation is not just a word that means, it doesn't just mean price inflation. So you got to think about it, wage, prices, or monetary. Because monetary inflation is just print money. And when you print money without actual real world demand for that money, it decreases the value of that money. Just like if you had one Yu-Gi-Oh card, like my kid they always used to trade Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But if you had one really rare Yu-Gi-Oh card, it was worth more than the rest. But if you had all of a sudden tons of those Yu-Gi-Oh cards, they become worth a whole lot less, right? It's so easy. Like I say, I could explain this, and I did explain this to my kids when they were younger. My kids actually, when they were prepubescent and even in their early teens, were probably smarter or more intellectually observant or financially or economically literate than most Canadians that I see today. And that's a sad reality. That's a sad reflection on the education system and the political system and the kind of narratives that they try to jam into the heads of the Canadian population. Anyways, I've been rambling on so long that I didn't really get to talk about this article. Well, like I say, the headline of it is, inflation heated up to 2.1% annual rate last month. Prices of gasoline was 19% higher in November compared to a year ago. So if gasoline is 19% higher, who benefits from that? You know, someone that has an oil and gas company, right? Of course, right? Which is great for them, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But for you as a consumer or an employee, did you benefit? No, that means it's costing you more to get to work or to go visit your family or to go buy your groceries. That's a net negative, right? Unless your employer was smart enough to, and some of them do. So if you're a good employer, a good moral employer, and if inflation heated up to 2.1%, so you were generating more revenue or profit to that tune, well, pass off at least a larger, substantial portion of that to your employees. Don't keep it all just for yourself. But see, that's the thing. Corporations nowadays, they're screwing over their employees, not necessarily because they want to, but they're being screwed over by governments too. And they're like, well, think about it. Human beings, it's all about me first, right? So the corporations or the owners of these corporations are all about, well, I want to make sure to keep my business sustained or to keep having higher returns for my investors so they'll keep investing in my company. Yeah, I want to pay my employees more, but damn it, priorities, right? So we're all stuck in this quagmire, this continual race to the bottom, to the lowest common denominator. So I don't necessarily blame employers, even though if they stood in solidarity with their employees, I mean, there's so many of us that we could push back against central planners, these fucking parasites in government, with a much better mandate and be able to just railroad through and overpower anything that they try to impose upon us if we would stand in solidarity with each other. But employers try to seek out more profits. Employees see their boss as their oppressors or whatever because of political propagandist Marxist ideology. So this doesn't seem to happen. I'm trying to help educate and inform, not just business leaders, but employees as well. It's like, stop fighting with each other, right? Stop fucking using each other as a tool to benefit yourself at the expense of the other. Stop lobbying government to curry more favor for you so that you have more beneficial and more power over your employees. And employees, stop using these fucking goddamn middleman bureaucracies or fucking unions to keep fucking with your employers. Come together. Start talking with each other a little bit. Creating and growing government has never benefited neither employers or employees. It only benefits the parasitical, authoritarian ruling class. That's who has benefited all along for those last 40 years. Not the employers and not the employees. Well, I mean, depending on who was in power, sometimes it was the employers, but ultimately, we would have all been much more beneficial and better off absent the parasites that constantly have the authority to dictate, micromanage, and dominate our fucking social and economic lives, because There's so many of us, well, not me, maybe not you, but there's so many people that keep lobbying them to curry favor for their particular side of the political narrative. Come on, folks. Put those fucking parasites at the back of the bus where they belong. Let's start dealing with each other. Mano a mano, employer and employee, boss, worker, however way you want to describe yourself, entrepreneur, or the newly hired. Listen, we, the employer and the employee, we are ultimately the ones that benefit society tremendously. We're the ones that create and produce everything. The government, Fox, the central planning dipshits, they don't produce anything. They're parasites. They live off of our productive wealth and our productive capacities. Now, I get it. Everyone wants to, if there's this entity where everyone has the ability or the capacity to seek out to impose their rules, their mandates, their edicts on the other, everyone's going to rush to fill that void. The employers are going to say, oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to hope the government will carry more favor for the employers. And the employees will be like, oh, I hope the government will carry more favor for the employees, right? Socialist versus capitalist bullshit. Let's reject all this nonsense. This is 20th century bullshit, folks. We live in the 21st century now. Can we get beyond this at some point in time? Let's make this relationship between you and I, employee, employer, or whatever kind of construct you want, but at least get away from this pretense of having any pretense of authority to impose our wills, our mandates, our edicts onto each other. Let's make everything about voluntary contracts. We all win under that circumstance. It's a Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.